So manifest destiny is the first part, and manifest destiny is the desire, or this idea that is the destiny of America to become a continental nation, meaning sea to sea. And it turned out it was very popular. A lot of it was westward we go. The idea is we as a country. In fact, one of the most famous paintings representing manifest destiny would be called Westward We Go. That's it right there. The idea is the U.S. should be continental, sea to sea. It didn't necessarily mean that the United States would be the entire continent, even though there are a lot of people that were thinking, let's get the whole thing. That's coming down the road, especially a certain section of the country. But there are a few reasons why this desire to go westward, and remember, and do get this down, this is really nationalistic. Nationalistic. You know, this concept now, it is our continent. It is ours. We have earned it. And I almost forgot, if you look at this map right here, basically, that is the western border of the United States. Oregon, by the 1830s, it's mostly Britain. The United States have a claim. Yes, disregarding the people who actually live there. And what country is this after 1821? That's Mexico. Massive country. So, nationalism. And it fits in a couple different ways. The first one is this really, it's hard to define what it means, but this idea of spreading American civilization. Spreading American civilization. And what does it mean to be an American? You know, that was clearly up in the air to this day. But this concept is that we will spread what we love about America to these other places, not just the Louisiana Purchase. When citizens of the U.S., when they crossed the border and went into Mexico or went into Oregon, they didn't all of a sudden just become, well, you know, now I'm in a different place. I'll call myself an Oregonian or whatever it might be. No, they went as Americans. Even though this was not America. When they went to California, they went as Americans. Even though technically they're now in Mexico. And this would be a huge issue in Tejas, right there. That would be a big issue. So this is one of the most famous paintings. I bet a lot of you have seen it. It's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I believe. I've not seen it, but I think it was there. I know the painting, it's cool. It's huge. And one of these flat little projections do not do it justice, but it really personifies the attitude, this nationalistic American idea. So this is Lady Columbia, and few people know that we had these giants who would lead the way to conquest, right? Yeah, we all know that. But remember, Uncle Sam and Columbia would be symbols of the U.S. to the end of the century, and Lady Columbia would kind of go away. But what is she leading into the West? Say it again.
Light.
This is the big thing about the light of civilization and darkness, storm clouds, and light. And light has more than just civilization. It is light. In the light, or even white, was good, evil, civilized, savage. And what's she carrying? What's that? Well, part of it is, it's implying the Constitution, so American values, but then what else? Yeah, it's actually telegraph lines, it's pre-power, but in the right track. Technology, what's right behind you? Well, first off, you have, still a little dark, the first wagons, fur trader, prospectors, farmers, wagons, but then you notice trains, and then in the most light, civilized the United States. What's that? Oh, a wreath? It kind of does look like one. I think they kind of meant it to be like a wreath, but it's the wreath is something more.
I just didn't see that. Yeah.
Which is a clever way of doing it. But who's in the darkness? American Indians and the animals. So it's pushing progress. It's pushing out the darkness. Civilization and savage. And this is, of course, horribly prejudiced, and also implying that this progress is kind of inevitable, it's good. In fact, the big thing is it's always good. We want this, it always is good. And we should know, regardless of your point of view on a lot of things, but in some degree, it's not always good. It's always much more complex, but this is very triumphant. But remember, after Tippecanoe, War of 1812, Horseshoe Bend, American Indians, the idea began to shift that they're no longer the real American citizens of the U.S. And this is where you start getting this era that talk of American Indians as the noble savage, which is a pretty horrible thing, because it implies that they're noble, therefore they're not necessarily immoral, but there's something savage or dark or sinister, which, by the way, this is really important. That will justify taking your land, because they're just savages. It's justification. They are just wasting the land. So, next. This is also nationalistic because it increases the size of the American economy, but trade. Fur trade. Remember I talked about the fur trade way back in economic imperialism and King Philip's War, how they would make the tribes dependent upon European goods? Well, the same thing's going to happen here. But it's not just that trade, there's also agricultural trade. And then the China trade was just becoming huge. And these great harbors here. Also whaling. Whaling boat, this was just about the time of the last golden age of whaling. Not necessarily golden age for the whales, I guess, but it's pretty horrific. And in fact, it's no coincidence that the United States just at this time would have their first agreement with the Sandwich Islands to take that to let whaling boats land in Maui or the Sandwich Islands. Hawaii. Yeah, that's why. So with that, next. Here is a more like American civilization, but it's harder to define. Okay, we get the idea of land, but why they wanted the land? You know, hey, that's why they always want. They wanted land. But this so-called American dream, which is coming about this concept of the 1840s and 1850s, goes back to colonial America. Every American, what do they want? That little piece of land to call their own. Remember Jefferson's idea of, remember that term yeoman? Independent farmers. I want my own little piece of land. Therefore, I'm truly independent. And even people who were stuck in factories or immigrants coming from Ireland or Germany or wherever, going to New York City, living in the 5 Points or Hell's Kitchen, living in misery, they're still thinking someday maybe I can get here. And that became the dream. The American dream to own that little piece of land. And where's the land? It's in the West. Now, the thing is, they didn't know what kind of land was in the West. They knew it was very potentially very dry, but that American dream, that would blow up. The American dream would change in the 20th century. The Great Depression would blow up the idea of being small farmers. And the dream would change. Most Americans just wanted a more, the American dream became like this material idea of land's material, like a house, car. In the 50s, television, washer and dryer, which is a big deal. If you don't have one, refrigerator, 2.5 children. Okay, with that. So, but the also diffusion, that means spreading out and creating more of what type of states? Slave states. Manifest destiny would also be, in fact, remember what I told you, slavery in the territories was the trigger of the war. This would be a major sectional issue. Will there be more slave states? And southern states, even places like Virginia and South Carolina, which, to be honest, a lot of their politicians didn't want necessarily new states until you put it in this concept. We need more slave states here and here for more senators who are pro-slavery. Senatorial balance. And it became a massive issue of the sectional crisis that's coming out of the Civil War. Slavery in the territories. And there'll be a number of things that personify, we'll get to it, but it's all related to manifest destiny. Now, when I was a youth going to school, manifest destiny was really presented as almost like this triumphant spread of American culture, American civilization. So what I told you, then it became a little bit more complex about what happened to the people who actually lived there. But even then, it was always this triumphant idea. Well, it is much more complex than that. And also, the issue of slavery is sometimes forgotten, how that would be pushed through. And in fact, both political parties, the Whigs would implode and die because of that issue. And the Democrats nearly did. And out of the roots would come the Republicans. And the Republican Party, its initial founding was to stop slavery spread in the territories. So all those issues about the Industrial Revolution, they'll all blow up about how slavery was profitable because of the Industrial Revolution. So back to this. So the first citizens of the U.S. were in the fur trade. I didn't put down the fur trade, so put right down the fur trade. The fur trade. And the mountain men were the first a lot of citizens of the U.S. I should have put down fur trade. That's Joe Meade, probably the most famous of the mountain men.
So the mountain men were fur traders?
Yeah. There were actual trappers who did it. But most of the actual killing of the animals were done by American Indians. And the whole issue of why this happened, and why this, for about 15 years, this kind of little mini culture of just a few thousand people and the tribes they connected with along the plains and the eastern edge of the Rockies, it's called the carriage trade. What wealthy people in big cities, what they wanted to wear, that pushed the fur trade. And what do they want to wear? These hats. And what were those hats made out of? Beaver tail. Yeah, beaver. And that's beaver right there. And so what they would do is kill beaver and ship them west, scrape off the hard fur on the outside, the felt on the inside, would make a really warm top hat. And that became the symbol of wealth. And that's what they wanted in London and New York City. So that's why they nearly killed all the beaver. And so these big fur trading companies would go set up forts. They would trade with the various tribes. Remember we talked about the fur trade, so that would happen again. The big thing was whiskey. That would just decimate the tribes. But the most famous of these forts, in my view, is Fort Union because it's in Montana. But Fort Union by the American Fur Trading Company, and it's right here, just near where the Yellowstone and the Missouri run together. And so they run together just across the North Dakota border, but Fort Union's just on the Montana side of the border. And they whitewashed the fort, and so it can be seen for miles. I always think that's kind of cool, but it's just a fur trading fort. If you go there today, it's part of the National Park Service, but they also operate it like it's 1850. So you go in there and you kind of step into a little time warp. It's really neat. Has anyone ever been there? It's a cool area. There's all these badlands and all this area, these low buttes, a couple forested areas, and then flat plains, big marshy area where the rivers run together. It's really cool. And then about 3 miles away, nothing but oil wells. It's fascinating. About 15 years, those will probably be dead oil wells, but you know, let's go over there. But this, along with other forts along this boundary, like Henry's Fort or Fort Hall, and a few other forts are fur trading forts. The problem was the carriage trade changed. And literally at about 1840, the whole thing ended. Like overnight, boom. The era of the mountain men just opened like that. Because the demand on the carriage trade changed. They didn't want beaver felt hats. In fact, that became almost, this started happening actually in the 1830s. That became like a symbol of, well, they just give them away. And so you see a lot of, it became a hat that you could buy really cheap. So ironically, it went from the wealthy undercarriage to poor immigrants wearing beaver felt hats. What became the style? Hats made out of what? Anyone know? Remember I mentioned the lucrative China trade. Silk. Exactly, silk hats. Which come from what? Who makes silk? Yeah, silkworms. That's they're web. Silkworms. That's where silk comes from. And so that became the style. Overnight, probably saved the beaver. Literally. They would have killed them all. But I just saw went to the Helena Regulated Reservoir. There's a beaver. Good story, huh? Yeah. Okay, the house. Yeah, just went under the ice. And a muskrat. And about 4,000 geese. Okay, moving on. And so next came the immigrants. And that's when they would start calling this an American empire, or simply empire upon the trails. Because trails westward then, immigrants from the east would start going westward. And most or there wasn't a huge amount of immigrants that were actually going to, most commonly into Oregon Territory along the Willamette River, some went along the Sacramento River. A few went down here, but it was a desert. Who would live there? And, or the same thing, a few in the Santa Fe, but this is Mexico. But they brought America with them. This is a wagon train from 40 years after the Oregon Trail, but I just thought this was a good picture because it showed the Conestoga wagons. And they're a little bit closer than what they normally be, but it's still a good vision of a wagon train. All the problem is oxen are really bad for pulling wagons. You know why? They get lame really easy. Their clothes begin to split. I know it's horrible. And their yokes choke. So next time you're using a wagon to go across country, don't use oxen. What do you use? Huh? That's what the beaver are for. That's why looking for beaver. Mules, horses, mules. Walleye? Did someone say walleye? Oh, that said walleye. Yeah, land walleye though, they're too mean. You can't tame them. So, immigration, I just put this up to give you an idea of the extent. In just 20 years, 1840 to 1860, over 250,000 immigrants came. And I should add, 1840, what huge economic disaster just happened before that? The Panic of 1837. No coincidence that people began to, oh my God, I don't know if I want to stick around here. So people with a little bit of money to afford the incredibly expensive wagons and supplies and money to get to Independence, Missouri, which is now near present-day Kansas City, to begin the trip. Most people didn't have that kind of money. There are three big spikes you'll notice in immigration. What was the cause of this spike? Yeah, Florida or California gold rush. How about this spike? Nevada gold rush. Virginia City and the Comstock Lode in Nevada. There's a lot of Virginia cities. And so that's the immigration. And this is the big movement of Mormons, for example. We had to leave now. And so Oregon Trail is a great painting. And the reason I put this up there is I wanted to mention the Hudson River School. This was an American school of art. And at first it was a school on the Hudson River in New York City, but it turned into a style of art. That's the name, school. Very romantic. This vision of the way things should have been. And so this is one of these, this would romanticize their vision of what the West was. So this is kind of a cool painting. It's one of those, yeah, you can't really get a full idea of it because it's a flat image on a screen, but they're going to Oregon, going into the light. But this also has a couple double meanings. I should also add that Burstead, who was a German immigrant, had never been to Oregon. Like a lot of people, we just kind of imagined what it would be like. But there's something else. Is this positive or negative? When I first look at it, I think of positive because it's going into the light. You know what I mean? Like a new, wait a second. If you're going west into the sun, what is the sun doing?
Setting.
Oh, it's setting. So what's going to happen very soon? The dark. I think it's the promise of good, but the unknown. I think it's very clever. Because it's romantic, but is it? We don't know. That's also one of the great things about art. You can interpret it in a lot of different ways. It really matters how it makes you feel. But I like that painting. But this is an attitude about the United States. The reason I put it up there, there's going to be this vision of the West. Remember, Thomas Jefferson had the back porch of his home looking west. This vision of what the West, the myth of the West, or what it should be like, and what the reality is. Now, the reality can be pretty harsh in the West. Winter's coming. But with that also, they've never been to the West. So this myth is going to be more important. In the most popular television shows, when television was first created, were Westerns. The most popular movies for 40 years were Westerns up until the 1960s. This mythic version of the West. And if you ever go to the East Coast and tell people if you're in Montana, you'll get some amazing questions about what they think the West is like. Has anyone ever done that? Yeah. I've been asked if I ride my horse to school. You know.
We have phones and internet.
Yeah, phones, internet, electricity. Do people freeze to death? Which, yeah, I said yes. But and then in the spring it's always sad because we find the frozen bodies. You know, it's just what we have to do to survive. And you know what? They believe every single word of it.
There is some truth to it, though. Especially on some of the reservations.
Well, oh, we're done?
Yeah.
Well, it could be anywhere where people, that's a sign of poverty and mistreatment, but, so, the Oregon Trail is probably the most famous one because most of the people, even though most of the people went on the Oregon, or to California, those either went to Oregon Trail or went around, but this one is because it really gave a claim to Oregon. Citizens of the U.S. settled on the Willamette. And how long would this trip take? No, God.
3 months.
Not quite that, but 5 to 6. Let's say not quite that. Not quite 5 years. A little bit more than that's what I meant to say. 5 to 6 months. 5 to 6 months. And you couldn't leave too early because you might catch a snowstorm, but also flooding and the river's too high. Leave too late, you'll be caught out here in the high plateau where it doesn't rain and there's hardly any food. So it's a really tough one. You got to leave here. And the trail is a dirt trail on ridges. Trails like this will be made on as much as they can on high points. You see them on hills. And I've always wondered about that. I remember when I first went to parts of the Oregon Trail, and I was just a little kid. In fact, that's when I came out west on the Oregon Trail. But I remember thinking, God, wouldn't it be hard to get the horses out there? But I never thought about it. You want it on a hill, a dirt trail, because if it rains, the rain goes away from the trail. If it's down below a hill, the rain will wash the trail away. So they try to make it as much as possible on hills or on ridges, which is something like, oh, I guess if you're not used to roads being washed away all the time by rain, just don't think about it. But like, for example, it better not be too far into summer when you get to Chimney Rock or Scotts Bluff. And it better be early July when you get to Independence Rock, that kind of thing. You had to be at certain spots and then roll into here in the fall. And this was a tough area and this was hell. And the other thing is, it took a lot of money because the wagons are small. The wagons are really small. So you have to buy some supplies. And the last place to buy supplies, Port Boise, there was nothing there. It's Fort Hall. Could you imagine the prices for goods at Fort Hall? 50 or 60 times what they pay in the United States. Why? Monopoly. They gouged. And so look how small the wagon is. And this would be your tent at night. You sleep in the wagon, so you couldn't really carry much with you. Limited amount of food, water, things to repair these wagons. Has anyone ridden on a wagon for a long period of time? It's awful. They just jolt and bounce around. People would ride back these and get seasick. If you couldn't see, going 3 miles an hour. If anybody's ridden on a wagon for a while and didn't mind it, it's because they had shocks on it. These things didn't have shocks. And here's the inside of a wagon. This is 1870s. That's fording a river. That's 1860s. This is a reenactment, but that's Chimney Rock. I don't know how they got the name. That's one of those things. It's only about a third as high as it used to be. It fell from 2 big hunks in the 60s and 70s. When I was a little kid, I saw it about twice as tall chimney. The next time one of those happens, which is kind of sad, but that's the way it goes. It just that's Scotts Bluff, which is now a beautiful town in Nebraska. Scotts Bluff. All my relatives live in Nebraska, so I've been to Nebraska. I'm bragging now many times, but. Let's jump right to this. Independence Rock might be my favorite place. If you ever get a chance, go to Independence Rock. It's just this big rock out in the middle. It doesn't look like much. You can see it for a long way, so it's one of those spots we made to Independence Rock. But this was a spot where they knew the hardest part of the trip's coming right to this. And so they took either axle grease or they carved their names and other bits of graffiti all over this rock. And the year they went, and it is just great. So here's 1850. Etc. It's just really cool. And the reason I like it is, think about it like how proud they were. I made it. I made it this far. And I want people to remember. So I just think that's just neat. But there's also some graffiti and some of this relatively 1840s obscenities, which are amusing in a dark and funny way. But here's what it looked like outside. Or Independence Rock. It's pretty rough. And the thing about it is, you walked. no one rode, you walked the whole way. So they were of a different breed back then. It's basically, of course I want to walk to Oregon, just take off. Not quite like that, it was a miserable, awful trip. The water, more and more, it would become alkaline. What does alkaline mean? It's kind of salty. Because when water picks up various things in the sediments in the soil, and in dry areas it evaporates really fast. It evaporates really fast, water goes away, so the water that remains is really salty. So that's why well water, sometimes in some areas like eastern Montana, will be salty. And what happens if you get hurt? Or get dysentery? Who played the Oregon Trail game? Yeah, who always got dysentery? You guys haven't played the Oregon Trail game? Oh my goodness, that's the most historically accurate game ever.
Elementary school, they have it on the school iPods and we get to play for free.
You can go online, just type in Oregon Trail, and you can play the game. It's silly. It's kind of funny. It was a big deal when it came out, like in 1983, when computers were relatively new. But yeah, it's kind of funny to play. Yeah.
How long was the trail? Like miles?
I can't remember the exact amount. I would say about 1,300 miles. I can't remember the exact. I know it's over 1,000. Yeah.
What was that fort that sold the supplies?
Fort Hall.
2000.
Can you imagine walking that whole thing? That would just be awful. But also, they were tougher. You broke a leg, you hobbled along on makeshift crutches and just kept going. Because you couldn't ride with a broken leg. That wagon jolt, it would kill you. Now this was, a lot would die along the way. Here's a picture I took near Independence Rock, and I just thought this was really cool. You could still see the wagon ruts. And I think about this, this part where they had to go down the hill, and that must have been pretty scary. This is gumbo. You know what gumbo is, hills? It's a term for, not the soup, but it's not a Cajun soup. It's kind of clay soil. And so when it gets wet, it becomes almost like glue. And everything sticks to it. You try to run like wagon wheels. And so, tough journey. Thousands would go. One of them we have to mention very quick were along almost the same trail as the Mormons. And I like to talk about a little bit more about Mormons here because they're one of the groups that came out of the Second Great Awakening and became more mainstream. But it also is an intersection of the Industrial Revolution, the cultural changes, the ideas of democracy and government, the Industrial Revolution and Manifest Destiny, and we'll come back to slavery. It covers everything. It's an amazing story. So just a couple things really quick about it. We've already mentioned they came out of the burned over district, and this is a very young Joseph Smith at the beginnings of photography. Not, that would be soon before he died. And Joseph Smith, to not go into details of all this, he found a couple of plates. Like sometimes they would be called scrolls, but actually plates. It's complex. The story changed a couple times. But from this, he would transcribe into eventually what became the Book of Mormon. This took about a decade to do. And the point about this was, it was incredibly controversial to other Christians. And think about a time of this religious revival, where there was a real movement to, as they saw it, get back to the roots of Christianity. And to many people, this is seen as blasphemy. To come up with your own section of the Bible, even though it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's what many people thought. This was part of what's called the Restoration Movement, and this was to bring back the roots of the church, yet of Christianity. Yet Mormons had a big disagreement about the nature of God. In fact, their argument was that Christians have been doing it wrong since 310 AD. Actually, 313, the Council of Nicaea. But the point is, they told Christians, you've been doing it wrong. And they had a different also point of view about what God is, and it's different than what other Christians believed, and so that was seen as blasphemy. And now, what Joseph Smith originally taught, how it changed over the next about 20 years, then he would be killed, and then how Mormons would change, but every religion changes over the years, so Mormons today are different than what they were then, but I'm trying to explain why to Christians outside and to other people, they saw them as actually a threat. And that is why Mormons would be forced to move. They had to leave the burned over district. And Smith and about 50 followers left. Before we get to that, they believed in millennialism. There were a lot of millennial groups. They thought the end was near. Remember I told you about the Millerites? They went on top of the roofs of their homes in 1844? to get ready to be taken up to heaven. And then they called it the Great Disappointment when it didn't happen, which you got to admit is really kind of funny in a very dark way. They were disappointed the earth didn't end. Well, this was the same idea, that there's going to be a second coming. And so, and a lot of people are not going to be saved. Remember I told you this is where the term the rapture came from, even though not in this faith, but it's the same idea. This was spread throughout a lot of Christians. They're called pre and post millennials. It's kind of complex. But this was the point, is we have to then go on our own. And that's when Smith would introduce what's called a theodemocracy. What's a theocracy? Anyone know? A theocracy is government based upon religion. So he said this is going to be a democracy based upon religion. And we're going to have to form our own state, because the second coming is about here, the second coming of Jesus. Even though they had different points of view on Jesus. And so they want to form, the point is, their own communities, with their own kind of form of government. So think about this group that to many people they thought are not just outside the mainstream, but even blasphemous, and then they want to form their own state. To many, this was a threat. That's why they would first go to Ohio, and then Missouri, and be run out of Missouri at gunpoint. But I should add, why did they become popular though? 50 went to Ohio, a few thousand would be in Missouri. The panic of 1837. Economic panic, people are insecure, some went west, groups in the Second Great Awakening got bigger, including the Mormons. So this, like I said, ties everything together. It's a fascinating story, and has a lot of impact to the West today. So after Missouri, they went to Nauvoo, Illinois, which is just across the river. This is a picture of the temple built there. If you ever get a chance, go there. It's now preserved by the National Park Service, and it's like kind of stuck in like 1840s. They have a lot of it preserved, and not only was it this a Western city, or then a Western Illinois city, but a city on the Missouri or the Mississippi, so it has that element of just what a city was like in the 1840s, but also history of the Mormon faith. But the really big one there was the Underground Railroad. That was a major junction in the Underground Railroad, Underground Railroad was for doing what? Yeah, to try to help slaves who were running away get north and also get out of Illinois. Illinois was not safe for them either. Yeah.
Does that building, that picture have a gold top? Is it like the white building, that picture, does it have like a golden top?
Yeah, it's gilded gold, yeah.
Okay, so there's a building that's like exactly like that in Frankfurt.
Oh yeah. This was the first temple was in Ohio, first one, but this is the first big one, and they copied this over and over again. So it was a lot like it, so it's not surprising. And yeah, just historically, it's really interesting. And you know, for those, and then I see if you're a Mormon, but if you're not Mormon, I'm not Mormon. I'm passing. I think it's just amazing to go there. But part of the thing was, for lots of reasons, but don't forget to this, our own city, they started creating a private army. And by creating a private army, and then he started talking loose, Joseph Smith started talking about becoming president. Now, at first it was president like of his theodemocracy, but maybe the whole US. People who lived outside of Nauvoo began to see him as a real threat. And he got this kind of competing armed camps. But what was the biggie? The biggie that would lead to the westward movement of Mormons? Plural marriage. Joseph Smith announced, in fact, began to encourage leaders of the church to have many wives. He had 27. He probably knew this before, and to many outsiders, this was seen as a proof of their not only blasphemy, but their decadence. You can have any word you want. And this big crisis for the Mormon church for the next 20 years about, because this not only violates the law, but to many values that a lot of citizens of the U.S. have. And not Mormon people who were followers, but did not believe in plural marriage, they started a newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor. And this newspaper had one issue where they blasted plural marriage. And Smith shut it down. How dare you go against my rule? It became a real fight, and literally civil war began. Within Nauvoo, between Mormons who followed plural marriage and a smaller group that didn't, or didn't believe in it, and then outsiders joined it. And that erupted into a violent fight where Smith was captured, tarred and feathered by people who lived outside the city who had simply, their point of view, had had enough, and he would be tortured to death, lynched. Now, lynching, most people think it's hanging, and I'll come back to this, but it's torturing to death. So Lynch is murdered, or Smith is murdered, and to those who would survive, there was kind of a power struggle, but the decision was made to get the heck out of the U.S. And where did they go? Utah. Beginning in 1845, actually they went over to Missouri and sent people along the Oregon Trail to find a place they could go. And they were going to go to Mexico. Brigham Young would win a power struggle, become the leader, and they would go along the Mormon Trail, which is right along the Oregon Trail. But this covers so many things, and it will come back to slavery. I love this picture. So they cut a picture of Smith out, a photograph of him near the end of his life. Here's Young at a few years later. Put the pictures together, old style cut and paste. Painted around the edges to make kind of smooth them out. You can't see how almost they had no features. And then they took a picture and took a paintbrush and tried to paint the cheeks like skin, or more like a natural skin tone. And you can catch it right here. Natural skin tone for Caucasians, right here. And what happened? It smudged. And so that's where you get this. And then there's my favorite point. Ready? See it? Old photo. If you weren't sure, that's an old photo. But they went westward, overland, and they went to the Great Salt Lake. Why the Great Salt Lake? There it is here. Here's a laid out the city, which Brigham Young personally stepped off the streets. And if you've ever been to Salt Lake City, we don't have many big cities nearby, so a lot of you might have been there. It's the easiest big city I've ever been in to get around in. It's really nice. And in fact, I was just thinking about that when I was in Philadelphia, which is just all haphazard sections, and it's just everywhere really nice. Right here, it's a basin. All the water flows here. Remember I talked about evaporation. That's what happened here. The water evaporated, but water was left. It's incredibly salty. Go take a big swig of the Great Salt Lake. You can float it sometimes here. The salt is so thick it's buoyant. But who else would want it? They thought they could escape. Then the Mexican War would happen and the U.S. would get it. Then another crisis would happen. And yes, that'll come back to slavery. But I have to add one more thing. Brigham Young realized we might need to run away again and get to this new island they had just discovered in America, just heard about, called Samoa. He sent people to here, near an old Spanish mission, which is now in Mexico. And they began to farm. In fact, they tapped into an unknown aquifer and opened this area up to irrigation, lemon trees. Others would follow. And what city did they really get started? Los Angeles. Los Angeles was started by Brigham Young thinking about we might have to run away again. I think that's just so an amazing cross-section. Will come back to the Mormons because slavery in the territories, once people started coming in these areas, are they going to be free or slave? And look at the percentage of slaves as we move this diagram. Watch this. So dark red, greatest percentage of slaves. Make sense? 1830, diffusing, look by 1860. Look at Texas. And that will become the focal point. This area, good for cotton, lots of slaves. And yes, I'll explain that, including Mormons who are abolitionists would have slaves. I will explain. I will explain. So Texas. Texas, all things will come together, and the issue of Texas would arguably be the actual trigger, the straw that broke the camel's back. Texas. 1821, Mexico won their independence from what country? Spain. And There's Father Hidalgo, who's one of the great heroes. They tried to create a republic, but Mexico's huge. It goes all the way up to the northern border of Nevada, California, and Utah, and all the way down to the Yucatan. This area is all the desert, and they can't get people. They need Mexican citizens to live here and here, especially Tejas, because there is a very aggressive country moving this way. They need citizens. So they made a decision that if you could tell Mexico, go back and say, don't do it, it will nearly destroy your country. Of course, they wouldn't listen to you. But they made a really dumb move. Well, we need people who are not American Indians because they want people they could say are Mexicans. Yes, there is prejudice. They asked citizens of the U.S., American immigrants. They said, we'll give you great land if you agree to become Mexican citizens. So take your oath. I, right hand, and also become Catholic. Change your religion. And what did a lot of citizens of the U.S. do beginning about 1824? I'll be Mexican. I'll become Catholic. Well, what were they doing? Fingers crossed. Yeah, they just, because what did I tell you? What followed American settlers? They all thought they were Americans. In fact, they used to say they followed the flag. American civilization followed. This was a terrible move. But one of the elements they have to mention, last thing for today, the Comanches. The Comanches were this incredibly fierce, relatively small tribe, but fierce, that dominated this area. Plains Indians, there's not going to be very many in the tribe because there's such a shortage of water. But they were the best light cavalry in the world. When the Spanish brought back the horses, they took to them. Small little ponies, these are Comanches, this is 1890s, but they are Comanches. And they terrorized them and their allies, the Kiowa, all the way up to Wyoming. And they needed Mexico, we need people there to control it and take it from the Comanches. The Comanches were such great horsemen that the men, supposedly they couldn't hardly walk on ground. They were on horse. They kind of almost fall down. That's me imitating them falling down. But with a full gallop, young men supposedly could hang from the neck and shoot, not even hang, that holds up the legs, and shoot bow and arrow under the neck without stirrups, mind you. If you've ever ridden a horse without stirrups, you know what I'm talking about. Heck, I think with stirrups is a little bit dangerous. Without stirrups, under the neck, and can be accurate over 50 yards. I mean, literally accurate, like they would shoot at knobs on trees and nail. From 25 yards, they could throw a spear and hit any part of a body at a full gallop. So their raiding parties were the most fierce on the plains. In fact, the only thing close, maybe the Comanche, the Cheyennes, Lakota, but even then. Oh, I should add, what would take care of the Comanches? Modern weapons. You ever heard of a Colt revolver? The first revolver. Fired 6 rounds in 30 seconds, they just couldn't match the fire. There just weren't very many of them. So, the Alamo is tomorrow, by the way.
Are these the tribes in the Spirit?
I have no idea what spirit. Gosh, I don't know.
Spirit?
No.
You've never seen Spirit?
Oh my goodness!
It's totally about like Western expansion from an animal's point of view.
Oh, from a.
It's great.
But is it good?
It is.
When did it come out? I've never even heard of it. I'm sorry.
It was a long time ago. It's like a kid.
Well, now, see, a long time ago for you might be different than a long time ago for me.
Like 10 years.
See, that's like yesterday to me. No, but trust me, when you get old, you'll think the same way.
Are we in the library or down here?
We're down here.
Wait.
Spirit? Yeah, they've had enough of you. They don't want to watch Spirit. I'll remember it. Has anyone here seen Spirit? Is it good?
Thank you.
That's a ringing endorsement. I think it was good. Is that a, like, sweat, is that a letter on your sweats? Like an old,
Oh, yeah, it's an A.
for,
I don't know. It was on sale, so I got it.
Hello? Sarah's calling me.
she's skipping?
No, she's asking if we're going to the computer lab.
We're gonna go to the library.
The library? What? Wait, which one?
Oh, no, we're going to the computer lab. Basement, computer lab, I
No,
lied.
nope, computer lab.
Up in the night.
Okay. Okay, bye.
All right, I'm just gonna go on record.
Get out.
Why would people get like dogs on their shirt? I don't understand.
What if it's your dog?
Yeah, what if it's your dog?
But you,
I get my dog on a shirt. He's ugly.
He's ugly.
He's this really old chihuahua. He's like, his trachea collapses, so you'll hear him honking, trying to get
oh,
it.
poor little pooch.
I know, he's a little baby.
Can I finish that test
Now, that's
Like,
crazy
right in the
talk.
face, He's got his bug eyes. You're so ugly.
Camden.
So are we in the library or the?
What'd I do with yours? Oh, I put it in here.
I should probably go open it.
Okay, you're gonna come with me. We're down in the basement computer lab on special topics.
All right.
So you do it like in the back of the room. Sound good?
All right.
Let me shut the stream off. Come on.